I thought success meant having everyone's approval, especially my family's recognition that I'd finally made it in their eyes. I was wrong. Success is what happens when you stop needing their validation to know you've already won. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months ago, my older brother Cameron thought my sustainable packaging company was a complete joke. He'd roll his eyes whenever I mentioned EcoWrap Solutions, calling it my little environmental hobby that was draining my savings account. My parents would exchange those concerned glances whenever I brought up my business at family dinners in our hometown of Riverside Heights. "Amelia's still playing entrepreneur," Cameron would say with that patronizing smile, adjusting his expensive tie from his corporate job at Pinnacle Consulting. "Maybe when she gets tired of losing money on cardboard boxes, she'll consider a real career." But I believed in what I was building, even when absolutely nobody else did. Then came the annual Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the most prestigious fundraising event in Riverside Heights. Cameron had been invited as Pinnacle's representative, and somehow he'd convinced our parents that bringing me along would be good networking for my little venture. I should have known it was a setup. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, Fortune 500 executives, successful entrepreneurs, old money families, and influential investors. Everyone looked polished and important in their designer gowns and tailored suits. And then there was me, wearing a dress I'd bought on sale 6 months ago, clutching a small purse that contained exactly 3 business cards because I couldn't afford professional printing. EcoWrap Solutions had been my passion project for 2.5 years. I'd started it after witnessing the massive waste problem in packaging during my brief stint at a logistics company. Traditional packaging was destroying the environment, and I knew there had to be a better way. So I'd quit my stable job, moved back to my childhood bedroom, and spent every waking hour developing biodegradable packaging solutions made from agricultural waste. The problem was, nobody seemed to care about environmental impact when it came to their bottom line. I'd pitched to dozens of companies, attended countless networking events, and cold-called so many businesses that I'd memorized rejection scripts. My bank account was running dangerously low, and I was starting to question whether Cameron might be right about my failed business. But I'd had a breakthrough 3 weeks earlier. After months of perfecting my formula, I'd finally created packaging material that was not only completely biodegradable within 90 days, but also 30% cheaper to produce than traditional alternatives. The key was my proprietary process for converting wheat chaff and corn husks into durable, flexible packaging material. It was revolutionary, if I could just get someone to listen. Tonight felt like my last chance to make something happen. I'd spent my remaining marketing budget on a ticket to this gala, hoping to connect with decision-makers who might understand the value of what I'd created. Cameron found me standing awkwardly near the appetizer table, trying to look like I belonged among Riverside Heights business elite. "There's my little sister," he announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Amelia, come meet some people from my world. Real business owners who might give you some perspective on what it takes to actually succeed." My stomach tightened, but I followed him toward a group of well-dressed professionals engaged in animated conversation about market trends and investment opportunities. "Everyone, this is my baby sister Amelia," Cameron said, his arm around my shoulder in a gesture that felt more possessive than supportive. "She's been playing around with some sort of eco-friendly packaging thing for a couple years now. Haven't made a sale yet, but she's persistent." The group chuckled politely. I felt heat crawl up my neck as Cameron continued his introduction. "I keep telling her she should consider getting back into the corporate world before she burns through all her savings on this environmental stuff. But you know how idealistic 20-somethings can be." "What exactly is your product?" asked a woman in an elegant black dress, her tone suggesting polite interest rather than genuine curiosity. "Biodegradable packaging made from agricultural waste," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite Cameron's undermining introduction. It's completely compostable and actually costs less to produce than traditional materials. Interesting concept, the woman said with the kind of smile that suggested she was already mentally moving on to other topics. Very noble, Cameron laughed. See what I mean? Always trying to save the world instead of making money. I've been trying to get her connected with some entry-level positions at established companies, but she's determined to keep throwing money at this environmental crusade. The conversation quickly shifted away from my business towards safer topics like stock portfolios and vacation homes. I stood there feeling invisible, my big moment turning into another confirmation that nobody took EcoWrap Solutions seriously. But across the ballroom, someone was watching our conversation with intense interest. Someone who would change everything in ways I never could have imagined. Someone who knew exactly who I was and what my company represented. Someone who was about to make Cameron regret every dismissive word he'd ever said about his little sister's failed business. Because sometimes the biggest surprises come from the people who've been paying attention when everyone else has been looking away. And sometimes the very person your family member is trying to impress turns out to be the one person who recognizes your true worth. I just didn't know it yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The truth was, I'd been living this nightmare for 2.5 years. Every morning, I'd wake up in my childhood bedroom at 5:30 a.m., surrounded by prototypes of biodegradable packaging samples and rejection letters from potential clients. My parents' house in the quiet Maplewood district had become my unofficial headquarters, much to their growing concern and Cameron's endless amusement. "Still playing scientist in your bedroom, Mel?" Cameron would say whenever he visited, poking his head into my makeshift laboratory, where I'd converted Mom's old sewing room into a research and development space. Scales, pH strips, and agricultural waste samples covered every surface. The smell of fermenting corn husks wasn't exactly what you'd call professional, but it was where the magic happened. My parents, David and Claire Thornton, had been supportive at first. When I'd quit my logistics coordinator job at Henderson Supply Chain to pursue EcoWrap Solutions, they'd encouraged my entrepreneurial spirit. "Follow your passion, sweetheart," Mom had said, even helping me set up my workspace. But after 6 months of no income, their encouragement had turned to gentle suggestions. After a year, those suggestions became concerned conversations about backup plans. Now, at the 2.5-year mark, family dinners had become exercises in avoiding the elephant in the room. "Any promising leads this week, honey?" Dad would ask, his tone carefully optimistic, but his eyes betraying worry about my dwindling savings account. "A few companies are reviewing my proposals," I'd reply, which was technically true. They were reviewing them right before sending polite rejection emails citing budget constraints or alignment with current supplier relationships. The reality was brutal. I'd pitched to 127 companies in 2 years. Exactly 127. I kept a spreadsheet because tracking rejections was the only way to maintain any sense of progress. Food manufacturers, e-commerce companies, retail chains, shipping companies. Everyone agreed. My product was innovative and environmentally responsible, but nobody was willing to be the first to switch from their established packaging suppliers. Meanwhile, Cameron's career at Pinnacle Consulting was skyrocketing. At 28, he was already a senior associate working with Fortune 500 clients. His LinkedIn posts about closing major deals and attending industry conferences were a constant reminder of what real success looked like in our family's eyes. "Your brother just signed another 6-figure contract with Meridian Industries," Mom would mention casually while I measured wheat chaff samples in the kitchen. "They're so impressed with his strategic thinking." Cameron had always been the golden child. Valedictorian in high school, full scholarship to Westmont University MBA from the prestigious Blackstone Business School. He lived in a downtown loft, drove a BMW, and wore suits that cost more than my monthly food budget. I lived in my childhood bedroom, drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a rattling exhaust pipe, and bought my clothes from discount retailers. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone, especially during family gatherings. Amelia's still working on her environmental project, Mom would explain to relatives, the phrase environmental project somehow managing to sound both supportive and dismissive at the same time. "That's nice, dear," Aunt Patricia would respond with the kind of smile reserved for children's art projects. "And what's your real job?" The worst part wasn't the condescension. It was the growing doubt in my own mind. 2.5 years was a long time to survive on savings and part-time freelance work. My business checking account had $3,247 remaining. My personal savings were down to $892. I'd already sold my decent car, most of my jewelry, and anything else of value to fund my research and development. But the product worked. God, it really worked. My biodegradable packaging wasn't just an environmental feel-good story. It was genuinely superior technology. The agricultural waste formula I'd developed created packaging material that was stronger, more flexible, and more cost-effective than traditional options. It could handle temperature variations, moisture, and rough handling better than most conventional materials. Plus, it decomposed completely in 90 days under normal composting conditions. I'd tested it extensively. Drop tests, compression tests, humidity tests, temperature cycling, everything. Major packaging companies would kill for this formula if they understood its potential. The problem was credibility. I was a 26-year-old woman working out of her parents' house with no employees, no fancy office, and no impressive client list. When procurement managers received my cold emails, they saw amateur hour, not innovation. "Maybe you should consider licensing your formula to an established company," Dad suggested during one particularly difficult conversation about my finances. "Let them handle the manufacturing and sales while you collect royalties." But I'd researched that path extensively. Large packaging companies would lowball the licensing fees, bury the technology to protect their existing product lines, or steal the formula outright and tie me up in legal battles I couldn't afford. No, if EcoWrap Solutions was going to succeed, it had to be on my terms, with my vision maintaining control of the technology that could revolutionize sustainable packaging. Which brought me to tonight's charity gala. The $500 ticket had wiped out most of my remaining marketing budget. But events like this were my only chance to access decision-makers who might see past my circumstances to the potential of what I'd created. I'd spent 3 days researching every company that would be represented tonight. Executives from Coastal Manufacturing, Riverstone Packaging, Summit Distribution, and dozens of other companies that could become my first major client if I could just get them to listen. Instead, I'd ended up as Cameron's cautionary tale, introduced to his professional network as the little sister who was still trying to make environmental packaging work, despite obvious signs it was time to give up. Standing in that elegant ballroom, surrounded by successful business leaders while Cameron painted me as a naive idealist throwing money at a lost cause, I felt smaller than I had in months. But I was about to discover that sometimes your biggest breakthrough comes from the most unexpected source. Sometimes the very room where you feel most invisible contains the one person who's been looking for exactly what you've created. I just had to survive the rest of Cameron's introduction first. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, printed on thick cream cardstock with gold embossing that screamed exclusivity. The Hartwell Foundation's annual Innovation Gala, celebrating tomorrow's business leaders today. I'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, sitting at my cluttered desk in what used to be Mom's sewing room. The invitation wasn't addressed to me. It had come to Cameron at his downtown office, and he'd casually dropped it on our parents' kitchen counter during Sunday dinner. Pinnacle's a platinum sponsor this year, he'd mentioned while cutting into Mom's pot roast. They're expecting all senior associates to attend. It's where real business gets done in this city. The way he emphasized real business wasn't lost on anyone at the table. "Sounds impressive," Dad had said, genuinely proud of Cameron's professional success. "Will there be networking opportunities?" "The best," Cameron replied, then glanced at me with what I initially thought was brotherly consideration. "Actually, Mel, you should come as my guest. Might be good for you to see how established companies operate. Could give you some perspective on scaling a business properly." My fork had paused halfway to my mouth. Cameron inviting me to a high-level business event? It was so unprecedented that Mom and Dad exchanged surprised glances. "That's very thoughtful of you, Cameron," Mom said carefully. "I don't know," I'd replied, suddenly suspicious. "Those tickets are probably expensive, and I'm not exactly dressed for." "Don't worry about the ticket," Cameron interrupted, with a wave of his hand. "Pinnacle gets a table for 12. We never fill all the seats anyway, and you can borrow something from Mom's closet if you need to." The casual dismissal of my wardrobe concerns should have been my first red flag, but I was too focused on the potential opportunity. The Hartwell Foundation Gala was legendary in Riverside Heights business circles. CEOs, investors, and decision-makers from every major company in the region would be there. It was exactly the kind of event where I might finally connect with someone willing to take a chance on EcoWrap Solutions. "Are you sure?" I'd asked, still not quite believing Cameron's sudden generosity. "Absolutely. It'll be educational for you." The word educational carried an undertone I should have paid more attention to, but I was already mentally preparing my elevator pitch. Now, 3 weeks later, holding that invitation while surrounded by agricultural waste samples and rejection letters, I felt a mix of excitement and terror. This was either going to be my breakthrough moment or the most expensive humiliation of my entrepreneurial journey. I'd spent the intervening weeks researching every company that would be represented at the gala. Coastal Manufacturing had a massive packaging division and had recently announced sustainability initiatives. Riverstone Packaging was actively seeking innovative materials for their eco-friendly product line. Summit Distribution was expanding their green logistics offerings. Each company represented a potential first major client that could transform EcoWrap Solutions from a bedroom startup into a legitimate business. I'd prepared customized proposals for my top 5 prospects, printed on the last of my good presentation paper, and bound in folders I'd bought with money that should have gone toward groceries. The challenge was getting past the initial introduction. In my experience, business development happened in those crucial first 30 seconds, when someone decided whether you were worth their time. Coming as Cameron's guest might give me credibility I couldn't earn on my own. Association with a successful consulting firm could make decision-makers take me seriously long enough to hear my actual pitch. I'd practiced my presentation dozens of times in the mirror, timing it to exactly 90 seconds. Long enough to convey the revolutionary nature of my technology, short enough to hold someone's attention at a social event. EcoWrap Solutions has developed proprietary technology that transforms agricultural waste into packaging material that's stronger than traditional options, costs 30% less to produce, and decomposes completely in 90 days. We're not just offering an environmental alternative, we're offering a superior product that happens to be sustainable. The key was leading with business benefits rather than environmental messaging. I'd learned from 127 rejections that executives cared about bottom-line impact first, environmental responsibility second. But first, I had to survive the evening without Cameron sabotaging my efforts. His sudden invitation still puzzled me. We'd never been particularly close, even as children. Cameron was 3 years older and had always occupied a different tier in our family hierarchy. He was the achiever, the one who met and exceeded every expectation. I was the creative one, the one who asked too many questions and colored outside the lines. As adults, our relationship had settled into polite distance, punctuated by his occasional commentary on my unconventional career choices. He wasn't cruel, exactly, but he had a way of framing my entrepreneurial efforts that made them sound like an extended phase I'd eventually outgrow. Maybe the gala invitation represented a genuine shift in his perspective. Maybe he'd finally recognized that EcoWrap Solutions had legitimate potential and wanted to help me succeed. Or maybe he was setting me up for some kind of object lesson about why I should abandon my business and pursue traditional employment. Either way, this was my shot. I'd invested too much time, money, and emotional energy into EcoWrap Solutions to let family dynamics derail my one chance to access Riverside Heights business elite. The dress code was cocktail attire, which meant I'd be borrowing Mom's navy blue wrap dress and her pearl jewelry. Not exactly cutting-edge fashion, but respectable enough for a business networking event. I'd get my hair done at the local salon and splurge on professional makeup. First impressions mattered, especially when you were already fighting an uphill battle for credibility. I'd also prepared a small portfolio of product samples, actual packaging material I'd created from wheat chaff and corn husks, along with test results demonstrating its strength and decomposition timeline. Visual proof was worth more than any verbal pitch when dealing with skeptical executives. The invitation had one final detail that made my pulse quicken: special recognition for emerging innovators changing the future of business. Maybe, just maybe, this was my moment to stop being Cameron's little sister with the environmental hobby and start being Amelia Thornton, CEO of the next big thing in sustainable packaging. I tucked the invitation into my planning folder alongside my target company profiles and presentation materials. In 6 days, I'd find out whether Cameron's unexpected invitation was the break I'd been waiting for or the setup for the most public failure of my entrepreneurial journey. But something told me this gala was going to change everything, one way or another. I just had no idea how dramatically my life was about to shift, or that the person who would change my entire trajectory was already planning to be in that ballroom, waiting for exactly the right moment to turn Cameron's condescension into the catalyst for my success. The morning of the gala, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., staring at my reflection and wrestling with a decision that felt monumentally important. In my hands were 2 business cards, the last 2 professional cards I could afford to print. Just 2 cards, for an evening that could potentially change everything. The smart thing would be to stay home, save the money I'd spent on salon appointments and makeup. Avoid the inevitable awkwardness of trying to network while being introduced as Cameron's struggling little sister. Protect myself from another evening of polite dismissals and patronizing smiles. But the alternative was admitting defeat. 2.5 years of work, innovation, and persistence reduced to nothing more than an expensive learning experience before I crawled back to the corporate world with my tail between my legs. I'd been wrestling with this internal debate for days, but the moment of truth had arrived. Cameron expected me to be ready by 6 p.m. I had roughly 11 hours to decide whether I was going to bet everything on one night or finally acknowledge that EcoWrap Solutions was a failed experiment. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Riley. "Big night, you got this, Mel. Those executives don't know what's about to hit them." Riley Martinez had been my cheerleader throughout this entire journey. We'd met in college, and while she'd gone on to become a successful marketing manager at a tech startup, she'd never once suggested I was crazy for pursuing my own path. She was also the only person who truly understood the revolutionary potential of what I'd created. "Your packaging technology is going to change everything," she'd told me just last week over coffee at our usual spot near the university. "The problem isn't your product. It's that you're ahead of your time, but eventually the market always catches up to innovation." Easy for her to say. Riley had a steady salary, health insurance, and a 401k. She could afford to believe in long-term market trends. I was running out of money and time. Another text arrived, this one from Cameron. "Pick you up at 5:45. Wear something that won't embarrass Pinnacle. This is a professional event, not a college party." The message sent a familiar spike of anxiety through my chest. Cameron's tone had shifted over the past few days from brotherly generosity to something that felt more like barely concealed irritation. Whatever his motivation for inviting me, It clearly wasn't growing enthusiasm for my success. I'd caught him on the phone yesterday talking to someone about the gala. Yeah, I'm bringing my sister. She's been playing around with some environmental business thing for a couple years. Might be good for her to see how real companies operate. Maybe she'll finally realize it's time to get serious about her career. The conversation had confirmed my suspicions. Cameron wasn't bringing me as a potential business partner or even a respected peer. I was his cautionary tale, his example of what happened when idealism collided with market reality. He was going to parade me around as proof that passion projects don't pay bills. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you nothing to lose. I walked over to my desk and picked up the portfolio I'd assembled over the past 3 weeks. Inside were product samples that represented months of research and development, packaging material that could revolutionize how companies thought about sustainability and cost efficiency, test results that proved my technology worked better than anything currently on the market. Whether Cameron intended to help or humiliate me didn't matter. This was my chance to put EcoWrap Solutions in front of decision-makers who had the power to change everything. I wasn't going to waste it worrying about my brother's agenda. I opened my laptop and sent 3 emails to executives I'd researched. Brief, professional messages mentioning I'd be at the gala and would love 30 seconds to share an innovation they might find interesting. Cold outreach at a social event was risky, but I needed every possible advantage. Then I called Riley. "I'm going tonight," I told her without preamble when she answered. "Of course you are, I never doubted it for a second." Cameron's planning to embarrass me, I can feel it. He's bringing me some kind of object lesson about failed entrepreneurship. "Let him try," Riley said fiercely. "You know what you've created, Mel. You know it works. Don't let his insecurity about your potential success make you second-guess yourself. What if nobody takes me seriously? What if I can't get past the introductions Cameron's planning? Then you make your own introductions. You find a way to get your samples in front of people who matter. You remember that you're not asking for charity. You're offering them the opportunity to be first in line for technology that's going to transform their industry." Riley was right. I wasn't going to the gala as a supplicant begging for approval. I was going as an innovator with a solution to problems these companies didn't even realize they had yet. I spent the rest of the morning refining my presentation materials and practicing responses to the questions I expected to receive. By noon, I felt as prepared as possible for whatever the evening might bring. Mom knocked on my bedroom door around 2 p.m., carrying the navy dress I'd be borrowing and a small jewelry box. "I thought you might want to wear Grandma's pearls tonight," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "They always brought me confidence during important business events when your father and I were first starting out." "Thanks, Mom." I fastened the pearl necklace, feeling its weight against my collarbone. "Can I ask you something? Do you think I'm making a mistake? Should I have given up on EcoWrap Solutions months ago?" Mom was quiet for a long moment, studying my reflection in the mirror. "Your grandmother started her catering business during the Depression, with nothing but a family recipe and determination. Everyone told her she was crazy to start a business when people could barely afford food, but she knew she had something special." She adjusted the pearls slightly. "You have that same certainty about your work, Amelia. I see it in your eyes when you talk about your packaging technology. That's not something you can fake or learn. That's vision. Cameron thinks I'm delusional. Cameron is successful in a conventional way, and conventional success has its place. But conventional thinking doesn't change the world. Your grandfather always said that the biggest risks often hide the biggest rewards." At 4 p.m., I started getting ready. Professional makeup, hair styled in a way that looked polished but not overdone. The navy dress fit perfectly, and combined with Grandma's pearls, I looked like someone who belonged at high-level business events. As I put the finishing touches on my appearance, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Tonight, I wasn't going to let Cameron control the narrative. I wasn't going to smile politely while he painted me as a naive idealist who needed to learn about, quote, real business. I was going to find a way to get my technology in front of people who could recognize its value, regardless of my brother's introduction. I was going to bet everything on one night, because that's what real entrepreneurs do when they believe in what they've created. The worst thing that could happen was confirmation that EcoWrap Solutions wasn't viable. But the best thing that could happen was validation that everything I'd sacrificed for the past 2.5 years had been building toward this moment. Cameron's car pulled into the driveway at exactly 5:45 p.m. I grabbed my portfolio, checked my reflection one final time, and headed downstairs. Time to find out which version of my future was waiting at the Grand Meridian Hotel. The Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom was even more intimidating than I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hundreds of guests in designer attire, while servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvre that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The room buzzed with the confident chatter of people who were accustomed to making million-dollar decisions over cocktails. Cameron had barely spoken during the 20-minute drive downtown, except to remind me twice that Pinnacle Consulting's reputation was on the line tonight. Just remember, Mel, these are serious business people. They don't have time for environmental activism or idealistic startup pitches. If someone asks about your background, keep it brief and professional. Now, standing at the edge of this glittering corporate ecosystem, I felt like an imposter wearing borrowed confidence, along with Mom's navy dress and Grandma's pearls. "There's our table," Cameron said, steering me toward a round table near the front of the room with a small placard reading Pinnacle Consulting, Platinum Sponsor. 7 people were already seated, all looking like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. "Let me introduce you to my colleagues." The introductions followed a predictable pattern. Cameron would present each person with their impressive title and recent achievements, then gesture toward me with barely concealed condescension. "And this is my little sister Amelia. She's been working on a small environmental packaging project for a couple years." Each time he used the phrase small environmental packaging project, I felt my professional credibility shrink a little more. None of these people made eye contact with me for longer than a polite handshake required. They saw exactly what Cameron was presenting: the CEO's little sister with a hobby business that wasn't worth their attention. "How nice that you're supporting sustainable initiatives," said Jennifer Walsh, a senior partner at Pinnacle with perfectly styled silver hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Environmental consciousness is so important these days." The patronizing tone was unmistakable. Environmental consciousness. Like I was collecting cans for a school fundraiser, rather than developing revolutionary packaging technology. "Actually, EcoWrap Solutions has developed proprietary technology that," I began, but Cameron smoothly interrupted. "Mel's very passionate about sustainability," he said with a laugh that somehow managed to sound both affectionate and dismissive. "She's always been our family idealist. Remember when she tried to convince Dad to convert our entire house to solar power in high school?" The table chuckled politely. I forced a smile while internally cringing at how effectively Cameron had just reduced my innovative business to teenage environmental activism. Before I could attempt to redirect the conversation, the lights dimmed slightly and the evening's program began. A series of speakers took the stage to discuss innovation in business, market trends, and the future of entrepreneurship in Riverside Heights. I listened intently, taking mental notes about which themes might resonate with potential clients, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my window of opportunity was rapidly closing. During the cocktail hour that followed the presentations, I tried to break away from Pinnacle's table to network independently, but Cameron seemed determined to keep me within his sphere of influence. Every time I started a conversation with someone new, he would materialize beside me with his practiced introduction routine. "My sister has always been creative," he told the CEO of Riverside Manufacturing, a company whose packaging needs could have been perfect for EcoWrap Solutions. "She's exploring environmental alternatives to traditional materials. Very forward-thinking, though probably a few years ahead of market demand." A few years ahead of market demand. Translation: impractical and uncommercial. The CEO nodded politely and immediately shifted the conversation to safer topics like industry consolidation and regulatory changes. Another potential connection lost before I could even explain what I'd actually created. This pattern continued for the next hour. Cameron would introduce me as his well-meaning but naive little sister. Potential contacts would offer polite encouragement while clearly filing me under not serious business, and meaningful conversations would evaporate before they could begin. By 8:30 p.m., I'd been introduced to representatives from 6 companies that could have been perfect clients for EcoWrap Solutions, and I'd made exactly 0 meaningful business connections. My carefully prepared elevator pitch remained undelivered. My product samples stayed hidden in my portfolio. My business cards remained untouched in my purse. Worse, I was starting to see myself through their eyes. Maybe I really was just an idealistic amateur playing at entrepreneurship. Maybe Cameron was right that I needed to face reality about market conditions and practical business considerations. Maybe 2.5 years of rejection letters should have taught me something about the viability of my venture. The lowest point came during a conversation with Patricia Chen, the Chief Procurement Officer for Summit Distribution. She was exactly the kind of decision-maker I'd hoped to meet. Someone with real authority over packaging choices for a major logistics company. But Cameron's introduction had poisoned the well before I could establish credibility. Environmental packaging is certainly a growing concern, Patricia said diplomatically after Cameron had finished his usual routine, though I imagine the cost implications are still prohibitive for most applications. Actually, our technology produces packaging that's 30% cheaper than traditional materials while offering superior performance characteristics, I said quickly, sensing a brief opening. That sounds optimistic, she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm sure with more development and proper market research, you'll find your niche. More development, proper market research, the polite corporate language for, you don't know what you're talking about. Cameron placed a hand on my shoulder with what looked like brotherly affection but felt like a muzzle. Mel's very enthusiastic about her project. We're proud of her dedication to environmental causes. Environmental causes. Not business innovation, not technological advancement. Causes. Patricia excused herself to speak with serious suppliers about actual procurement needs, leaving me standing there feeling like a child who'd been patted on the head and dismissed from adult conversation. You're trying too hard, Cameron said quietly once Patricia was out of earshot. These people can tell when someone's desperate. Maybe you should focus on learning from their experience tonight, instead of trying to sell them something. Learning from their experience. Another way of saying, know your place. But as Cameron guided me back toward Pinnacle's table, I caught sight of someone across the ballroom who had been watching our conversation with intense interest. A woman in an elegant charcoal suit, probably in her 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of confident posture that suggested serious authority. She'd been observing my interactions with various executives throughout the evening, though I couldn't understand why. When our eyes met briefly, she didn't look away with polite disinterest like everyone else had. Instead, she gave me a slight nod that seemed almost encouraging. Before I could process this strange moment further, Cameron was introducing me to yet another table of Pinnacle clients, and the cycle of polite dismissal began again. This is my sister Amelia. She's been working on a small environmental packaging project. I was trapped in Cameron's narrative, reduced to a supporting character in his demonstration of family tolerance for impractical dreamers. Every introduction chipped away at my confidence and credibility, until I felt like apologizing for taking up space at this gathering of real business people. But that woman in the charcoal suit was still watching, and something about her attention felt different from the polite dismissal I'd been receiving all evening. Something that suggested the evening might not be over yet. The moment that shattered everything happened during the award presentations. I'd been nursing the same glass of champagne for over an hour, standing at the edge of Pinnacle's table while Cameron worked the room with his colleagues. My portfolio felt heavier with each passing minute. All those carefully prepared materials, product samples, and test results that nobody had even asked to see. The evening's program had moved into its final phase, with the Hartwell Foundation recognizing various achievements in innovation and entrepreneurship. I watched politely as CEOs and established business leaders accepted awards for market expansion, technological advancement, and community impact. Each recipient represented exactly the kind of success I'd been chasing for 2.5 years. Then the foundation's president, William Hartwell himself, took the microphone for what he described as a, quote, special recognition moment. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we want to celebrate not just established success, but also the entrepreneurial spirit that drives innovation in our community. We'd like to recognize some of the emerging businesses and startup ventures that represent the future of Riverside Heights commerce. My heart started beating faster. This was what I'd hoped for. Some kind of opportunity to be recognized as a legitimate business rather than Cameron's little sister with environmental hobbies. We'd like to invite any entrepreneurs in the audience to stand and briefly introduce their ventures. This is your moment to share your vision with some of the most influential business leaders in our region. The room went quiet as people looked around for who might step forward. A few hands went up: a tech startup founder, someone developing medical devices, a woman launching a new restaurant concept. Each gave a brief, confident pitch that was met with polite applause. This was it. My chance to bypass Cameron's condescending introductions and speak directly to the people who mattered. I started to stand, my mouth opening to introduce EcoWrap Solutions to the entire ballroom. But Cameron's hand clamped down on my arm, pulling me back into my seat. "Mel, don't," he hissed under his breath. "You're not ready for this kind of exposure." "Let go of me," I whispered back, trying to stand again. "This is exactly what I came here for." "Trust me on this," Cameron said, his grip tightening. "These people will eat you alive if you get up there unprepared. You need more than environmental passion to present to this crowd." Around our table, his Pinnacle colleagues were watching our whispered argument with obvious discomfort. I could see them exchanging glances that clearly said family drama, and this is embarrassing. "I am prepared," I insisted, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to keep it low. "I've been preparing for 2.5 years." "Playing around in Mom's sewing room isn't preparation for a professional presentation," Cameron shot back. "Look around this room, Mel. These are Fortune 500 executives. They don't have time for amateur hour." The words hit like a physical blow. Amateur hour. In front of his colleagues, at the most important business event of my life, my own brother had just reduced everything I'd built to amateur hour. I felt my face burning with humiliation as the entrepreneurs on stage finished their presentations. The moment had passed. The opportunity was gone. And I was sitting there like a child who'd been told to stay in her seat while the grown-ups conducted real business. But the worst part came next. As the formal presentations concluded and people began moving around the ballroom again, Cameron stood up and addressed his table mates with what I can only describe as a performance. "I apologize for the distraction," he said, gesturing toward me with the kind of indulgent smile you'd give a toddler having a tantrum. "My sister gets excited about her environmental projects sometimes. She hasn't quite learned the difference between passion and business viability yet." The table chuckled uncomfortably. I sat there frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. "It's actually a good learning experience for her," Cameron continued, warming to his theme. "Being here tonight, seeing how real businesses operate at this level. Maybe it'll help her understand why we keep suggesting she consider more traditional career paths." Jennifer Walsh nodded sympathetically. "It's difficult when family members have unrealistic expectations about entrepreneurship. Market research and financial projections matter more than good intentions." "Exactly," Cameron agreed. "Mel's heart is in the right place. But she's been living in this fantasy where her little packaging experiment could compete with established industry players. Tonight should help her see the gap between amateur enthusiasm and professional business development. They were talking about me like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. Worse, they were using my presence at this prestigious event, an event Cameron had invited me to, as evidence of my professional inadequacy. Has she considered applying her environmental interests to a position with an established company? Asked Robert Kim, another Pinnacle partner. Someone with her passion might do well in corporate sustainability departments. We've suggested that route, Cameron replied. But she's been determined to prove she can build something on her own. Sometimes people need to fail before they're ready to accept practical advice. Sometimes people need to fail. The words echoed in my head as I stared down at my untouched dinner plate. This wasn't about protecting me from premature exposure or helping me learn about professional business practices. Cameron had brought me here to fail. He'd invited me to this gala specifically so I could be humiliated in front of the business community, proving once and for all that my little environmental project was exactly as naive and uncommercial as he'd always claimed. I'd been set up, meticulously, deliberately set up by my own brother. The realization was devastating, but it was also clarifying. Every introduction tonight, every undermining comment, every opportunity he'd blocked, it had all been orchestrated to demonstrate my inadequacy. I wasn't his guest. I was his cautionary tale. The problem with these environmental startups, Cameron was saying to the rapt attention of his colleagues, is that they prioritize ideology over market reality. Sustainability is nice in theory, but businesses need solutions that actually improve their bottom line. He was using my business as a case study in entrepreneurial failure right in front of me at the most important networking event in Riverside Heights. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab my portfolio and run out of the ballroom, drive home, and never speak to Cameron again. I wanted to quit EcoWrap Solutions, find a corporate job, and pretend this evening had never happened. But something stopped me from fleeing. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was 2.5 years of work that deserved better than this public execution. Or maybe it was the memory of that woman in the charcoal suit who'd been watching me all evening with what looked like genuine interest rather than dismissive pity. I raised my head and looked around the ballroom, trying to spot her in the crowd. If I was going to go down in flames, I at least wanted to understand why someone had been paying attention while everyone else was writing me off. That's when I saw her approaching our table, walking with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she had something important to say. Cameron was still holding court, explaining to his fascinated colleagues why environmental businesses were doomed to fail in competitive markets, when she arrived at our table and spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about sustainable packaging solutions." The table went quiet. Up close, this woman radiated the kind of presence that came from years of making consequential decisions. Her charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, her silver jewelry was subtle but expensive, and when she looked at me, I felt like she was seeing something the rest of the room had missed. "I believe you mentioned agricultural waste conversion technology?" she continued, her gaze fixed on me rather than Cameron. "I'd very much like to hear more about that innovation." Cameron's confident smile faltered slightly. "Oh, well, that's just my sister's little—" "I'm not speaking to you," the woman interrupted, her tone polite but unmistakably firm. "I'm speaking to the entrepreneur." And suddenly, for the first time all evening, every person at Pinnacle's table was looking at me with something other than condescending dismissal. They were looking at me with confusion, curiosity, and the dawning realization that maybe they'd missed something important. The woman extended her hand to me with a confidence that made the entire table lean forward in anticipation. "Dr. Sarah Whitfield," she said, her handshake firm and her eyes never leaving mine. "Chief Technology Officer at Meridian Industries." The name hit the table like a lightning bolt. Meridian Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates on the West Coast, with packaging divisions that supplied everyone from Amazon to major grocery chains. Dr. Sarah Whitfield wasn't just any executive. She was a legend in the industry, known for revolutionizing sustainable manufacturing processes and holding over 40 patents in materials science. Cameron's face went white. His colleagues suddenly looked like they'd swallowed their tongues. Jennifer Walsh actually dropped her champagne flute, though thankfully it was nearly empty. "Ms. Thornton," Dr. Whitfield continued, ignoring the stunned silence around our table, "I've been hoping to meet you all evening. Your work with agricultural waste conversion has been generating quite a bit of buzz in our R&D circles." My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. You know about EcoWrap Solutions?" Dr. Whitfield's smile was warm but carried an edge of amusement. "Know about it?" "My dear, we've been trying to reverse engineer your process for the past 6 months. Our materials team is convinced you've solved problems we didn't even realize we had." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Cameron made a strangled sound that might have been an attempt to speak, but Dr. Whitfield held up a hand without even looking at him. "When our procurement team received your proposal 8 months ago, it caused quite a stir," she continued, settling into the empty chair beside me as if she owned it. "Agricultural waste converted to packaging material with superior tensile strength, complete biodegradability, and cost reduction. Most of our scientists thought it was too good to be true." 8 months ago? I managed to croak. "But I never heard back from Meridian. I assumed you weren't interested." Dr. Whitfield's expression darkened slightly. "Unfortunately, your proposal got buried in our standard vendor review process. By the time it reached my desk 3 months later, our people had already spent considerable resources trying to duplicate your methodology. Unsuccessfully, I might add." She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of laboratory photos. "This is what our best materials engineers produced after months of research into agricultural waste conversion: brittle, inconsistent, prone to moisture damage. Meanwhile, the samples you sent with your original proposal are still performing perfectly under stress testing." I stared at the photos, my mind reeling. While I'd been collecting rejection letters and questioning my sanity, one of the most respected companies in the industry had been trying to steal my technology. "We've been attempting to contact you for weeks," Dr. Whitfield continued. "Your phone number had been disconnected." "I couldn't afford to keep my business line active," I admitted, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I've been using my personal cell, and your office address led to a residential building that claimed no business was registered there." "I work from home," I said quietly, acutely aware of how unprofessional that sounded to the Pinnacle table, who were listening to every word with growing amazement. "Smart overhead management," Dr. Whitfield said approvingly. "Some of our most innovative contractors operate lean. It's the results that matter, not the letterhead." Cameron finally found his voice. "Dr. Whitfield, I think there might be some confusion here. My sister's been working on a small environmental project, but it's hardly the kind of operation that would interest Meridian." "Mr. Thornton," Dr. Whitfield interrupted, turning to face Cameron for the first time since approaching our table. Her tone was arctic. "Are you suggesting I don't know innovative packaging technology when I see it?" "No, of course not, but because I've been in materials science for 23 years. I hold 3 PhDs in chemical engineering, polymer science, and environmental chemistry. I've overseen the development of packaging solutions for aerospace, medical, and consumer industries. So when I tell you that your sister has created something revolutionary, I'm not speaking from ignorance or family loyalty." The table was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Cameron looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Dr. Whitfield turned back to me, her expression warming again. "Miss Thornton, what's your production capacity?" "We're looking at an initial order that would require approximately 50,000 units per month, scaling to 200,000 within the first year." I felt dizzy. 50,000 units per month? I'd been celebrating when I successfully created 500 units for my sample presentations. I'd need to scale up significantly, I managed. Currently, I'm producing small batches for testing and samples. Naturally, what about your team? How many engineers are working on process refinement? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could lie, try to make EcoWrap Solutions sound bigger than it was, or I could be honest and risk losing this miraculous opportunity. I chose honesty. It's just me, I said. I developed the technology myself. I handle all aspects of the business. Instead of disappointment, Dr. Whitfield's eyes lit up with what looked like respect. Remarkable! You've single-handedly developed technology that our entire materials division couldn't replicate. That level of innovation is exactly what Meridian needs. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, but not just any business card. This was heavy stock with embossed lettering and the Meridian Industries logo. I'd like to schedule a meeting for next Tuesday to discuss a potential partnership, not a licensing deal. A full development partnership where you maintain ownership of your technology while gaining access to our manufacturing infrastructure and distribution network. My hands shook as I accepted the card. Partnership. Not acquisition, not buyout, not licensing. Partnership as equals. The initial contract value would be in the 7-figure range, Dr. Whitfield added casually, with significant performance bonuses based on market adoption rates. Jennifer Walsh made a choking sound. Robert Kim was staring at me like I'd just transformed into a different species. Cameron looked like he was having an out-of-body experience. There's one more thing, Dr. Whitfield said, her voice carrying a hint of mischief. We're announcing our new sustainable packaging initiative at next month's International Materials Conference in Denver. The keynote presentation will introduce our revolutionary new technology and the brilliant entrepreneur who developed it. I do hope you'll accept our invitation to be the featured speaker. Featured speaker at the International Materials Conference, the most prestigious event in packaging innovation, where industry leaders unveiled breakthrough technologies and emerging companies became overnight sensations. Yes, I stammered. I'd be honored. Dr. Whitfield stood, shaking my hand again. Excellent. My assistant will contact you Monday to arrange our meeting. And Ms. Thornton? Congratulations on building something truly exceptional. It's rare to encounter innovation of this caliber. As she walked away, the Pinnacle table sat in stunned silence. The same people who'd been patronizing me 5 minutes earlier were now staring like I was an entirely different person. Which, I suppose, I was. Cameron cleared his throat. Mel, I had no idea. That EcoWrap Solutions was a real business? I interrupted, finding my voice for the first time all evening. That I actually knew what I was doing? That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the naive idealist you've been describing to everyone? I was trying to protect you from success? I stood up, my portfolio in hand, feeling taller than I had in years. From being taken seriously? From having my work recognized by one of the most respected companies in the industry? The people around us were starting to stare, but I didn't care anymore. This was my moment, and I was going to own it. For 2.5 years, you've been telling everyone I was playing at business. Tonight, you brought me here specifically to humiliate me, to prove that my little environmental project was a joke. I looked around the table at his colleagues, who were now viewing me with something approaching awe. Well, congratulations, Cameron. You've definitely proven something tonight. I tucked Dr. Whitfield's business card into my portfolio like it was made of gold. You've proven that sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who know you best. The next 20 minutes at the gala felt like watching my entire life reorganize in real time. Word traveled fast in a ballroom full of business executives. Within moments of Dr. Whitfield's departure, people who had barely acknowledged my existence all evening were suddenly finding reasons to approach Pinnacle's table. The transformation was so dramatic, it was almost comical, if I hadn't been living through the surreal experience myself. The first to arrive was Patricia Chen from Summit Distribution, the same woman who had dismissed my technology as optimistic just an hour earlier. Her approach was hesitant, like someone trying to undo a social mistake without admitting they'd made one. "Amelia," she said, her tone completely different from our earlier interaction, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Dr. Whitfield. I may have been hasty in my earlier assessment of your packaging technology." I looked at her steadily, remembering how she'd talked about proper market research and finding my niche when Cameron had been controlling the conversation. Now her business card was already in her hand. "What specifically interests you about EcoWrap Solutions now?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she would navigate this reversal. "Well, if Meridian Industries is considering a partnership, that suggests significant commercial viability," she said carefully. "Summit Distribution is always looking for innovative packaging solutions that could give our clients competitive advantages." Translation: if it's good enough for Meridian, it's worth her attention. The same technology that had been optimistic 20 minutes ago was now a potential competitive advantage. Before I could respond, the CEO of Riverside Manufacturing appeared at Patricia's shoulder. This was the same executive who had shifted away from me when Cameron mentioned I was probably a few years ahead of market demand. "Miss Thornton," he said, extending his hand with the kind of enthusiasm he'd shown earlier only when discussing industry consolidation. "David Reynolds, Riverside Manufacturing. I believe we spoke briefly earlier, but I'd love to continue our conversation about your agricultural waste conversion process." We hadn't had a conversation earlier. Cameron had introduced me, Reynolds had nodded politely, and then immediately pivoted to asking Cameron about Pinnacle's expansion plans. But now, apparently, we'd had a meaningful discussion about my technology. "I'm particularly interested in scalability," Reynolds continued. "Our packaging division handles significant volume for agricultural and food service clients. If your technology can deliver the performance characteristics Dr. Whitfield mentioned, we'd be very interested in exploring supply partnerships." Behind him, I could see a small crowd forming. Executives who had been networking in other parts of the ballroom were making their way over, drawn by the unmistakable magnetism of a business opportunity they might have missed. Cameron sat frozen at the table, watching this parade of professionals who had been dismissing me an hour ago now compete for my attention. His colleagues from Pinnacle were equally stunned, but their shock was mixed with something that looked suspiciously like calculation. They were reassessing everything about this evening, including their own missed opportunities. "Amelia," Jennifer Walsh said, speaking to me directly for the first time all evening, "I'm wondering if EcoWrap Solutions has considered strategic consulting partnerships? Pinnacle specializes in helping innovative companies scale operations and navigate complex market entry challenges." The irony was breathtaking. The same woman who had patronized me about environmental consciousness 30 minutes ago was now pitching her services to help my little environmental project achieve market success. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. William Hartwell himself, the foundation president who had been recognizing established business leaders all evening, approached our table with obvious purpose. "Miss Thornton," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in any room, "I understand congratulations are in order. Dr. Whitfield speaks very highly of your innovation." The conversations around me paused. When the host of the evening's event wants to speak with you, everyone else pays attention. "I'm curious," Hartwell continued, "would you be interested in being featured in our quarterly innovation spotlight? We showcase emerging entrepreneurs who are developing technologies with significant market potential. The profile typically runs in the business section of 3 major regional publications. Media coverage, regional business publications. 6 months ago, I would have been thrilled by the possibility of any press attention for EcoWrap Solutions. Now it felt like validation from an entirely different universe. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, trying to maintain professional composure while internally marveling at how quickly the evening had transformed. Excellent. My marketing director will contact you next week to schedule an interview and photo session. We're particularly interested in highlighting local entrepreneurs who are solving global challenges through innovation. As Hartwell moved on to other conversations, I found myself at the center of a growing circle of business cards, meeting requests, and partnership inquiries. The same portfolio that had felt like dead weight all evening was now being eagerly examined by procurement officers, supply chain executives, and business development directors. My phone buzzed constantly with LinkedIn connection requests from people who had learned my name in the past hour. Email addresses were being exchanged. Meeting calendars were being coordinated. The networking event I'd struggled to break into all evening had suddenly reorganized itself around me. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Dr. Whitfield returned to our table one final time before leaving the gala. "Miss Thornton," she said, her voice carrying across the small crowd that had gathered around me, "I wanted to mention one more thing before I leave tonight." The conversation stopped. Everyone wanted to hear what the CTO of Meridian Industries had to add. "We've been so impressed with your technology that we're planning to announce our partnership as the centerpiece of our sustainability initiative. The press release will describe you as the innovative CEO whose breakthrough technology is revolutionizing sustainable packaging." CEO, not founder, not entrepreneur, not young woman with environmental interests. CEO. The announcement will go out to major business media outlets next Tuesday, following our formal meeting. I hope you're prepared for significant attention. This story has all the elements that journalists love. Brilliant individual inventor, revolutionary technology, major corporate partnership, environmental impact. She paused, looking around at the faces hanging on her every word. "In fact," Dr. Whitfield continued with a slight smile, "I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a case study in business schools. David versus Goliath stories where innovation triumphs over established industry practices tend to capture imaginations." As she walked away, I caught Cameron's expression out of the corner of my eye. He looked like someone watching a natural disaster destroy everything he thought he understood about the world. The same sister he had described as an amateur idealist just hours ago was being discussed as a future business school case study by one of the most respected executives in manufacturing. The woman he had brought to this gala as a cautionary tale about failed entrepreneurship was now the center of attention for every serious business leader in the room. And the little environmental project he had spent 2.5 years dismissing was about to be featured in major business publications as a revolutionary breakthrough. My phone rang with another call from someone who had somehow gotten my number from the growing network of professionals, who now considered knowing me to be a valuable connection. The momentum was building so fast I could barely keep track of all the opportunities being presented. Partnership inquiries, supply contracts, media interviews, speaking engagements, consulting offers. The success I had been chasing for years was suddenly chasing me. And we were only getting started. The ultimate moment of vindication came 3 days later, in a way I never could have anticipated. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, soon to be my former office, reviewing contract documents from Dr. Whitfield when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Pinnacle Consulting, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I wasn't particularly interested in hearing from Cameron or any of his colleagues after their performance at the gala. But curiosity won out. "Amelia Thornton," I answered, using the professional greeting I'd been practicing for my upcoming media interviews. "Miss Thornton, this is Marcus Webb, managing partner at Pinnacle Consulting." The voice was crisp, authoritative, and unfamiliar. "I hope you have a few minutes to discuss a significant business opportunity." Marcus Webb. I knew that name. He was Cameron's boss, the senior partner who had built Pinnacle into one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. Cameron had mentioned him countless times, always with the kind of reverence reserved for industry legends. "I'm listening," I said carefully. "I'll get straight to the point. Pinnacle has been retained by a global tech corporation to identify and evaluate emerging technologies for potential acquisition or strategic partnership. Your agricultural waste conversion process has come to our attention as a high-priority target. Global Tech Corporation. Even I knew that name. A massive technology conglomerate with subsidiaries in manufacturing, logistics, and sustainable development. The kind of company that acquired promising startups for hundreds of millions of dollars. Dr. Whitfield at Meridian spoke very highly of your innovation during a board meeting yesterday, Webb continued. She described your technology as potentially transformative for the entire packaging industry. Global Tech is prepared to make a substantial offer for exclusive licensing rights, or, alternatively, for complete acquisition of EcoWrap Solutions. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of offer are we discussing? Initial valuation suggests a range between $40 and $60 million, depending on the scope of technology transfer and your ongoing involvement in development. This would be one of the largest acquisition deals for a single inventor startup in the region's history. $40 to $60 million. For the little environmental project that Cameron had been dismissing for 2.5 years. I appreciate Global Tech's interest, I said, my business training kicking in despite the surreal nature of the conversation. However, I already have partnership discussions underway with Meridian Industries. Any new arrangements would need to complement rather than compete with existing commitments. Naturally, we're prepared to structure an arrangement that respects your current negotiations while maximizing value for all parties. The key is moving quickly. Global Tech wants to announce this acquisition as part of their quarterly earnings call next month. There was a pause before Webb continued, and when he spoke again, his tone carried a note of something that sounded almost like amusement. Ms. Thornton, I should mention that Pinnacle will be handling all aspects of this negotiation on Global Tech's behalf. Given the complexity and scale of the deal, I'll be personally overseeing the engagement. I see, I replied, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. Which brings me to an unusual situation, Webb said, and now I could definitely hear amusement in his voice. One of our senior associates, Cameron Thornton, has disclosed that he's your brother. Normally, family relationships would create a conflict of interest that would require recusal from the engagement. I waited, sensing there was more. However, Cameron has indicated that his personal relationship with you might actually facilitate negotiations. He's suggested that his insight into your background and motivations could be valuable in structuring an offer you'd find attractive. The irony was so perfect it was almost artistic. Cameron, who had spent years dismissing my business as amateur hour, was now positioning himself as the key to unlocking a deal that would make EcoWrap Solutions worth more than most companies Pinnacle represented. What's your perspective on Cameron's involvement? Webb asked directly. I considered my response carefully. This was a moment that would define not just my business relationship with Pinnacle, but my personal relationship with Cameron for years to come. Mr. Webb, I said finally, I think Cameron's involvement could indeed be valuable. He has a very comprehensive understanding of how I approach business decisions. Excellent. In that case, I'd like to schedule a meeting for Thursday morning to begin preliminary discussions. Cameron will participate as our lead analyst on the engagement, given his unique insights into your company's development history. After we concluded the call, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the agricultural waste samples and product prototypes that Cameron had mocked for years, and tried to process what had just happened. The most prestigious consulting firm in the region was pursuing me for a potential $60 million acquisition deal. And my brother, who had publicly humiliated me just 3 days earlier, was now going to be working for me, essentially, as part of Pinnacle's team trying to convince me to accept their client's offer. The reversal was so complete it felt like fiction. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. Heard about the Global Tech situation. Congratulations. We should talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, yes, we should. Thursday's meeting should be interesting. His response came immediately. Mel, I owe you a massive apology. I had no idea. No, I replied, you didn't. but you're about to learn. The next text took longer to arrive. I've been an idiot. A complete idiot. Your business is extraordinary, and I've been too proud and too stupid to see it. I considered various responses, then settled on, see you Thursday. Come prepared to discuss valuation metrics for revolutionary packaging technology. Over the next 24 hours, the business world seemed to reorganize itself around EcoWrap Solutions. Dr. Whitfield called to discuss how the Meridian partnership might complement rather than conflict with potential global tech arrangements. William Hartwell moved up my Innovation Spotlight interview to capture the breaking news of multiple corporate suitors. 3 different venture capital firms reached out through various connections, hoping to participate in what they sensed might be a bidding war for my technology. But the most satisfying moment came Wednesday evening, when my parents and I were having dinner in the same kitchen where Cameron had spent years explaining why my business would never succeed. $60 million? Dad repeated for the 3rd time, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. For agricultural waste packaging? For revolutionary, sustainable technology that happens to use agricultural waste, I corrected gently. The waste is just the raw material. The innovation is in the conversion process and the resulting material properties. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Sweetheart, I always believed in you, but I never imagined $60 million. It's just an opening offer, I said, trying to sound casual about numbers that were reshaping my entire understanding of what EcoWrap Solutions could become. We'll see where negotiations go. The doorbell rang and Dad went to answer it. I could hear voices in the hallway, then Dad returning with Cameron trailing behind him. Cameron looked different than he had at the gala. The confidence and condescension were gone, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like humility. "Hi, Mel," he said quietly. "I was hoping we could talk before tomorrow's meeting." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Sure, have a seat." He sat down carefully, like someone approaching a dangerous animal. "I need to say this properly. I owe you the biggest apology of my life. For years, I've been treating your business like a hobby that you'd eventually outgrow. I was completely, catastrophically wrong." I waited. "At the gala, I was trying to protect you from embarrassment, but I ended up being the one embarrassing our entire family. You've built something incredible, and instead of supporting you, I've been undermining you." "Why?" I asked simply. Cameron was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was scared," he said finally. "You took a risk I never had the courage to take. You bet everything on your own vision instead of following someone else's playbook. And when it started working, when you started building something real, it made me question everything about my own choices." It was the most honest thing Cameron had ever said to me. "Tomorrow," he continued, "I'm going to be working to get you the best possible deal from Global Tech. Not because you're my sister, but because you've earned it. Because your technology deserves it. And because it's time I started treating you like the CEO you've always been." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before: respect. "Okay," I said, "let's see what you can do." 6 weeks after the gala, I was standing in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, looking out at the Seattle skyline while waiting for what would be the most important business meeting of my life. The transformation had been breathtaking in its speed and scope. What started as a simple partnership discussion with Dr. Whitfield had evolved into a complex 3-way negotiation involving Meridian Industries, Global Tech Corporation, and EcoWrap Solutions. The deal we were finalizing today would change not just my company, but potentially the entire sustainable packaging industry. "The final terms are quite elegant," said Rebecca Martinez, the corporate attorney I'd hired after realizing I needed serious legal representation. She was reviewing the thick stack of documents that would formalize our agreements. "You maintain full ownership of your core technology and patents. Meridian gets exclusive manufacturing and distribution rights for the consumer packaging sector, and Global Tech receives licensing for industrial applications. The numbers were staggering. The combined deal value had reached $87 million, $42 million upfront, with performance-based payments that could reach another $45 million over the next 3 years. More money than I had ever imagined possible for the technology I developed in my childhood bedroom. But perhaps more importantly, the deal structure meant EcoWrap Solutions would remain an independent company, with me as CEO of what industry analysts were already calling the most promising sustainable technology startup in the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Whitfield entered the conference room with her usual commanding presence, followed by her team of engineers and business development executives. "Miss Thornton," she said warmly, "I trust you're ready to change the world today?" "I think we already have," I replied, gesturing toward the windows where construction crews were visible, working on what would soon be EcoWrap Solutions' new headquarters, a 15,000-square-foot facility that would house our expanded research and development operations. The irony of the location wasn't lost on me. The building was just 4 blocks from Pinnacle Consulting's offices, where Cameron spent his days working on the deal that would establish his little sister as one of the region's most successful entrepreneurs. Marcus Webb arrived next, bringing with him the global tech team that had been negotiating terms for the past month. The lead negotiator was a sharp woman named Linda Chen, who had quickly developed a reputation for getting deals done efficiently and fairly. "This has been one of the most straightforward negotiations I've handled," Linda said as we took our seats around the massive conference table. "When all parties recognize genuine value, the terms tend to work themselves out." Cameron was the last to arrive, carrying the analysis portfolio he'd spent weeks preparing. The transformation in our working relationship had been as dramatic as everything else about this situation. The brother who had once dismissed my work as amateur hour was now presenting detailed market projections showing how EcoWrap Solutions could capture 30% of the sustainable packaging market within 5 years. "The competitive landscape analysis is particularly compelling," Cameron said as he distributed copies of his presentation. "Traditional packaging companies are still thinking incrementally about sustainability. Agricultural waste conversion represents a quantum leap that gives EcoWrap Solutions a technological moat that competitors won't be able to cross for years." Listening to Cameron present my business as a revolutionary market opportunity felt surreal. His analysis was thorough, professional, and genuinely insightful. More importantly, it was clear he now truly understood what I had created and why it mattered. Dr. Whitfield nodded approvingly at Cameron's projections. Our internal analysis reached similar conclusions. The combination of superior performance characteristics and cost advantages creates multiple barriers to competitive response. As we worked through the final contract details, my phone buzzed with a text from Riley. "Watching the business news. Channel 7 just ran a story about your deal. You're officially famous now." The media attention had been overwhelming. The story of a young woman who developed revolutionary technology in her childhood bedroom, only to be dismissed by her own family before landing the biggest tech deal in the region's recent history, had captured public imagination. Business journals, technology blogs, and even mainstream news outlets had picked up the narrative. Forbes had already contacted me about a potential cover story. Harvard Business School wanted to develop a case study. 3 different publishers had reached out about book deals. The speaking requests were coming in faster than I could evaluate them. But the most meaningful recognition had come from an unexpected source. The Hartwell Foundation had announced that I would receive their annual Innovation Excellence Award at next year's gala, the same event where Cameron had tried to humiliate me just weeks earlier. The award recognizes individuals whose breakthrough innovations demonstrate both technological advancement and significant commercial potential, William Hartwell had explained when he called with the news. "Your agricultural waste conversion technology exemplifies exactly the kind of visionary thinking we want to celebrate." As the contract signing proceeded, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 24 months ago, I had been an unknown entrepreneur working in isolation, collecting rejection letters and questioning whether my vision had any commercial value. Today, I was signing agreements that would establish EcoWrap Solutions as a major player in sustainable technology. The transformation extended beyond just business success. I had moved out of my childhood bedroom into a downtown loft with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. I'd hired my first employees, a brilliant chemical engineer named David Park and a business development specialist named Ana Rodriguez, who had left established companies to join what they saw as the future of packaging innovation. More importantly, I was finally being taken seriously by the people who mattered most. My parents had gone from gentle concern about my career choices to barely contained pride in my achievements. Extended family members who had once offered unsolicited advice about finding real jobs were now asking if I needed help managing my success. The signing ceremony itself was surprisingly quick. After weeks of negotiation and preparation, the actual moment of putting pen to paper took less than 15 minutes. But as I signed my name to the final document, I felt the weight of everything that had changed. Dr. Whitfield raised a glass of champagne that had appeared as if by magic. To EcoWrap Solutions, and to proving that the best innovations often come from the most unexpected places. To taking risks, added Linda Chen from Global Tech. Cameron raised his glass and looked directly at me. To my sister, who had the courage to build something extraordinary when everyone else thought she was crazy. As we toasted the completion of our agreements, my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Ms. Thornton, this is Jennifer Walsh from Pinnacle Consulting. I wanted to follow up on our conversation at the Hartwell Foundation Gala about potential consulting opportunities. I smiled, remembering how Jennifer had dismissed my work as environmental activism before patronizing me about market research and financial projections. Ms. Walsh, I said, I appreciate the follow-up, but I think EcoWrap Solutions has our strategic consulting needs well covered at the moment. Of course, she said quickly. But perhaps we could discuss other opportunities. Pinnacle is always interested in working with successful entrepreneurs like yourself. Successful entrepreneurs like myself. 6 weeks ago, Jennifer Walsh had been explaining to Cameron's table why environmental startups were doomed to fail in competitive markets. Now she was calling me a successful entrepreneur and seeking opportunities to work together. I'll keep that in mind, I said diplomatically. Thank you for thinking of us. After I hung up, Cameron shook his head with a rueful smile. Jennifer's been asking me about you all week. I think she's hoping to claim credit for discovering your potential at the gala. Is that what happened? I asked, with mock innocence. She discovered my potential. According to her version of events, she always knew you were onto something big. Funny how memories change when the outcome becomes clear. As we prepared to leave Meridian Tower, Dr. Whitfield pulled me aside for a final conversation. Ms. Thornton, I want you to know that this partnership represents more than just a business transaction for us. Your technology is going to fundamentally change how companies think about packaging sustainability. But more importantly, your success is going to inspire other innovators who might otherwise be discouraged by conventional thinking. She paused, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see possibilities that industry experts miss. You've reminded all of us that the next breakthrough might come from someone working in their childhood bedroom rather than a corporate research facility. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely my world had transformed. The same route I'd traveled in my rattling Honda Civic just months earlier, I was now driving in the new Tesla I'd purchased after the first contract payments had cleared. But more than the material changes, it was the respect that felt most significant. I was no longer explaining or justifying my career choices. I was no longer defending the viability of EcoWrap Solutions. Instead, I was fielding requests from industry leaders who wanted to learn from my experience and potentially collaborate on future innovations. The woman who had once been introduced as Cameron's little sister with the environmental hobby was now being described in business publications as the visionary CEO whose breakthrough technology is reshaping sustainable packaging. And tomorrow, I would begin the next phase of building something even more extraordinary than I had originally imagined. 3 months after the deal closed, I found myself back at the Grand Meridian Hotel for the quarterly Riverside Heights Business Council dinner. But this time, everything was different. The same ballroom where I'd been humiliated as Cameron's struggling little sister now buzzed with executives eager to connect with Amelia Thornton, CEO of EcoWrap Solutions. The transformation in how people approached me was so complete it felt like attending a parallel universe version of that original gala. "Miss Thornton," said Patricia Chen, the Summit distribution executive who had dismissed my technology as optimistic, just months earlier. "I wanted to personally thank you for prioritizing our packaging partnership despite all the other offers you've received." The irony wasn't lost on me. Summit had been one of 6 companies competing for limited production capacity from our expanded manufacturing operations. The same woman who had once politely suggested I needed more development and proper market research was now grateful that EcoWrap Solutions had chosen to work with her company. "Your team's commitment to sustainable logistics made the partnership a natural fit," I replied diplomatically, though we both knew the real reason was Summit's willingness to sign the most favorable contract terms. But the most dramatic transformation in relationships had been with my own family. Cameron approached our table. We were seated at the head table this time as I was receiving the Business Innovation Award, looking genuinely proud rather than condescending. "The regional press coverage has been incredible," he said, showing me his phone. "The Seattle Times business section has your photo on the front page. Local entrepreneurs' agricultural waste technology attracts global investment." Our dynamic had evolved into something I'd never expected. Genuine professional respect mixed with rebuilt personal affection. Cameron had become one of my most effective advocates, using his position at Pinnacle to connect EcoWrap Solutions with potential clients and strategic partners. "I've been thinking about our conversation at Mom and Dad's house," Cameron said as we waited for the evening's program to begin. "When you asked why I had been so dismissive of your work for so long." I nodded, remembering that difficult but necessary discussion we'd had weeks earlier. "I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself," he continued. "I wasn't just scared of your success. I was jealous of your courage. You built something from nothing while I spent my career optimizing other people's ideas. You took real risks while I played it safe." It was a conversation that had been years in the making, and hearing Cameron articulate it felt like the final piece of our relationship healing. "But you know what's funny?" Cameron added with a slight smile. "Working on your deal taught me more about innovative business strategy than anything I'd done at Pinnacle. You forced me to think differently about risk, market positioning, and competitive advantage." The evening's program began with William Hartwell taking the stage to introduce the award recipients. When he called my name, the applause was genuinely enthusiastic rather than politely obligatory. These weren't people humoring Cameron's little sister anymore. They were recognizing a peer who had achieved something remarkable. "Amelia Thornton exemplifies the entrepreneurial spirit that drives innovation in our regional economy," Hartwell said as I joined him on stage. "Her breakthrough in sustainable packaging technology demonstrates how individual vision and persistence can create solutions to global challenges while building significant commercial value." As I accepted the Crystal Award, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that had been transformed by my success. Dr. Whitfield beamed with what looked like maternal pride. Marcus Webb from Pinnacle nodded approvingly. Even Jennifer Walsh was applauding enthusiastically, as if she'd been supporting my work all along. My acceptance speech was brief, focusing on the importance of supporting innovation even when it comes from unexpected sources. But the real satisfaction came during the networking portion of the evening, when I found myself at the center of conversations about industry trends rather than politely deflecting patronizing advice. The agricultural waste conversion process has applications beyond packaging, noted Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, a materials scientist from the University of Washington who had approached me about potential research collaborations. Have you considered textiles or construction materials? These were the kinds of technical discussions I dreamed of having during those lonely months of development work. Conversations with people who understood the science and could see possibilities I hadn't yet explored. The most meaningful moment came when a young woman approached me near the end of the evening. She looked to be in her early 20s, carrying herself with the nervous energy of someone at her first major business event. "Miss Thornton, I'm Sarah Kim," she said, extending her hand. "I'm a graduate student at Seattle University working on biodegradable electronics. I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "For proving that you don't need permission to innovate. Your story has been all over the entrepreneurship blogs I follow. Seeing someone develop breakthrough technology independently, without venture capital or corporate backing, has inspired a lot of us who are working on our own projects." Sarah's words hit me unexpectedly hard. I'd been so focused on the business success and family vindication that I hadn't fully considered how my story might affect other innovators facing similar challenges. "What's your technology?" I asked, genuinely interested. "Compostable circuit boards made from organic polymers," Sarah explained, her eyes lighting up with the same passion I recognized from my own journey. Still in early development, but the potential environmental impact could be huge. We talked for 20 minutes about her research, funding challenges, and the difficulties of being taken seriously as a young entrepreneur. It was like looking in a mirror from 2 years earlier. "Here's my card," I said, handing her one of the elegant business cards that had replaced my sadly amateur previous versions. "Send me your research summary. EcoWrap Solutions is launching an innovation incubator program next year to support emerging sustainable technologies." "Your work sounds like exactly what we're looking for." The drive home took me past my parents' house in Maplewood, where the bedroom that had served as my laboratory and office for 2.5 years now sat empty, converted back to Mom's sewing room. The agricultural waste samples were gone, replaced by fabric and pattern pieces for her quilting projects. But traces of my entrepreneurial journey remained. Mom had framed the first article about EcoWrap Solutions from the Business Journal and hung it near her sewing table. Dad had kept one of my early prototypes on his desk as what he called a, quote, "reminder that the best ideas often come from the most unexpected places." The transformation in my parents' understanding of my career path had been complete. Where they had once worried about my financial stability and professional future, they now fielded calls from relatives, wanting to know if I had any business advice for their own entrepreneurial children. "Your father's been impossible since the Forbes article came out," Mom had told me during our weekly dinner the previous Sunday. "He's shown it to everyone at the golf club at least 3 times. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in Sunday family dinners themselves. Cameron and I had returned to the easy sibling relationship we'd had as children, before competition and professional jealousy had created distance between us. Our conversations now ranged from business strategy to family memories, with none of the underlying tension that had characterized our interactions for years. "I have a confession," Cameron had told me during our most recent dinner. "I kept one of your original product samples from when you first started developing the technology. I told myself it was evidence of your unrealistic expectations, but I think I secretly knew you were onto something significant." "You still have it?" I'd asked, surprised. "It's in my office at Pinnacle. I look at it sometimes when I'm working on deals for other emerging companies. Reminds me not to dismiss innovation just because it doesn't fit conventional business models." As I pulled into the parking garage of my downtown loft, I reflected on how completely my world had reorganized. The same drive home that used to fill me with anxiety about mounting bills and uncertain prospects now felt like a victory lap through a life I'd built on my own terms. Tomorrow would bring more meetings with potential partners, strategy sessions with my growing team, and planning discussions for the expanded research facility. But tonight I was content to sit in my living room overlooking Elliott Bay, surrounded by awards and recognition that represented not just business success, but the validation of a vision that everyone except me had dismissed as impossible. The woman who had once been introduced as still figuring it out was now being quoted in Harvard Business Review about the future of sustainable innovation. And the family dynamics that had once been a source of constant stress had become a foundation of genuine mutual respect and support. 1 year later, I stood in the main laboratory of EcoWrap Solutions' new headquarters, watching my team of 12 engineers test the latest iteration of our agricultural waste conversion technology. The facility hummed with the kind of productive energy that comes from people who believe they're working on something that matters. Dr. David Park, our head of research and development, approached with test results that would have seemed impossible when I was working alone in my childhood bedroom. The new corn silk formula is showing 40% better tensile strength than our original wheat chaff process, he reported, his excitement barely contained. And the decomposition timeline has improved to 67 days. 67 days. Superior strength, lower costs. The technology that Cameron had once dismissed as environmental activism was now outperforming traditional packaging materials in every measurable category. But the real validation wasn't in the laboratory results or the financial success that had transformed my life. It was in the letter I'd received that morning from a packaging engineer in Indonesia who had read about our work and was developing similar technology using rice husks to solve waste problems in Southeast Asian agriculture. Your story gave me courage to continue when everyone said my ideas were impractical, she had written. If someone working in her childhood bedroom could revolutionize an entire industry, maybe the solutions to our environmental challenges really can come from anywhere. The letter was one of dozens I received each month from entrepreneurs, students, and researchers around the world who had been inspired by the narrative of EcoWrap Solutions. The story of the dismissed dreamer who proved everyone wrong had become something bigger than my personal vindication. It had become a symbol of why innovation requires protecting unconventional thinking. Ana Rodriguez, our head of business development, joined us in the laboratory with news that perfectly illustrated how completely my world had transformed. The European Union delegation wants to schedule a meeting next month about implementing our technology across their sustainable packaging initiatives, she said. They're talking about a continental rollout that could reach 200 million consumers. 200 million consumers. Using technology I'd developed while my family worried about my career prospects and my brother publicly dismissed my work as amateur hour. The irony of my success hadn't been lost on the business media that continued to cover EcoWrap Solutions' growth. Harvard Business Review had featured us in a case study about innovation from the margins, using our story to examine how breakthrough technologies often emerge from sources that established industries ignore or dismiss. The Thornton case demonstrates that expertise and resources, while valuable, are not prerequisites for transformative innovation, the article had concluded. Sometimes the most important qualification for changing the world is simply refusing to accept that something cannot be done. But the most meaningful recognition had come just 2 weeks earlier, when Dr. Whitfield called with news that still made me smile whenever I thought about it. "Amelia," she had said, "I wanted to personally inform you before the announcement goes public. The International Sustainable Technology Council has selected you for the Global Innovation Excellence Award. You'll be the youngest recipient in the award's 40-year history. The Global Innovation Excellence Award, given annually to individuals whose technological breakthroughs create lasting positive impact on environmental and social challenges. Previous recipients included pioneers in renewable energy, water purification, and sustainable agriculture, scientists and engineers whose work had literally changed the world. The selection committee was unanimous," Dr. Whitfield had continued. "Your agricultural waste conversion technology represents exactly the kind of thinking we need to address 21st-century environmental challenges. But more importantly, your story demonstrates that innovation can come from anywhere when individuals have the courage to pursue their vision despite skepticism. The award ceremony would take place in Geneva next month, with representatives from universities, governments, and corporations worldwide. The same technology that had once been confined to my childhood bedroom would be celebrated on a global stage as a breakthrough in sustainable innovation. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. "Just saw the Reuters article about your EU meeting. Dad's been showing it to everyone at the country club again. Pretty sure he's going to get kicked out for being too proud of his daughter." Our relationship had not just healed, it had evolved into something stronger than it had ever been. Cameron had left Pinnacle Consulting 6 months earlier to join EcoWrap Solutions as our head of strategic partnerships, applying his business development skills to expanding our technology's global reach. "I spent years working on other people's innovations," he had explained when he asked about joining the company. "I want to spend the rest of my career working on something that actually matters. Something that proves conventional thinking isn't always right." The decision had shocked Riverside Heights business community, where leaving a prestigious consulting firm to join your sister's startup was seen as either visionary or insane. But Cameron's insights into corporate decision-making and relationship building had accelerated our growth in ways I couldn't have achieved alone. More importantly, working together had restored the sibling partnership we'd had as children, before comparison and competition had created distance between us. Cameron brought strategic thinking and business acumen. I brought technological innovation and entrepreneurial vision. Together, we were building something neither of us could have created independently. As afternoon turned to evening, I found myself alone in my office, reviewing the presentation I'd give tomorrow to a group of Stanford MBA students who were studying EcoWrap Solutions as an example of disruptive innovation. The invitation had come from Professor Linda Chen, who was researching how individual entrepreneurs challenge established industry practices. "Your story raises important questions about how we evaluate business potential," she had said during our preliminary conversation. "Traditional metrics suggested your venture had little chance of success. No significant funding, no industry connections, no established team. Yet you created technology that billion-dollar corporations couldn't develop with unlimited resources." Looking back at the journey from my childhood bedroom to this moment, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about packaging technology or business strategy. It was about the difference between seeking validation and creating value. For years, I had measured my progress against other people's skepticism, letting their doubts erode my confidence in what I knew was possible. The breakthrough hadn't come when I finally convinced them I was right. It had come when I stopped needing their approval to continue building something I believed in. Cameron's dismissal, my parents' concern, the polite rejections from industry executives, none of that had been about the quality of my work or the viability of my vision. It had been about their inability to see beyond conventional frameworks for understanding business success. The moment Dr. Whitfield recognized what I had created, everything changed, not because my technology had suddenly become valid, but because someone with expertise had confirmed what I already knew to be true. Success, real success, isn't about proving doubters wrong. It's about building something so undeniably valuable that doubt becomes irrelevant. My computer chimed with an email from Sarah Kim, the graduate student I'd met at the Business Council dinner who had been working on biodegradable electronics. She had been accepted into our Innovation Incubator program and would be moving to Seattle next month to develop her technology with EcoWrap Solutions support. "Thank you for believing in my work when everyone else said it was too early for market acceptance," her email read. "I hope to follow your example of turning supposed weaknesses into competitive advantages." As I prepared to leave the office, I walked through the laboratory one final time, watching the overnight team run tests on our latest formulations. The agricultural waste samples that had once cluttered my childhood bedroom now occupied a state-of-the-art research facility. The rejection letters that had questioned my business viability had been replaced by partnership agreements with some of the world's largest corporations. But the most important transformation was internal. I was no longer the entrepreneur desperately seeking validation from people who couldn't see what I was building. I was the CEO of a company that was changing how the world thought about sustainable innovation, creating value for customers, shareholders, and the environment simultaneously. The woman who had once been introduced as still figuring it out was now being quoted by world leaders about the future of sustainable technology. And the little environmental project that had been dismissed as amateur idealism was now being studied in business schools as an example of how individual vision can reshape entire industries. Sometimes the biggest breakthrough comes not from convincing others you're right, but from having the courage to continue building when everyone else thinks you're wrong. Sometimes success isn't about external recognition. It's about internal certainty that what you're creating matters, regardless of who believes in it. And sometimes the most important validation comes not from applause, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing you bet everything on yourself and won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.